The Ramah in Hilchas Sviras Baomer Siman Tov Tzad Gimel. Today's the Ramah's yard site. The Ramah was a Rav in Kruka and Krakow. They bring that he was nifter, his yard site. It says on his kaver he was nifter Lag Baomer. The Taz in two places brings that the Ramah was nifter on Lag Baomer. They say that he was nifter not just on the day of Lag, but also in the year Shin Lamed Gimel, 1573. Though if you take a look on his kaver, it actually says Lamed Bais. Ask that question. They also say, besides that he was nifter on Lag Baomer Tav Shin Lamed Gimel, that he was nifter at the age of 33. The Chidah brings this. But Lamaisa, they question it. They say it doesn't, with the cheshbon, the years, he must have definitely been much older. On the note of the Ramah, the many svarim that he wrote about the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah also wrote a sefer on the Zohar. We'll get to Behemshach. Today is, the day that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was Megala the Zohar, or at least a part of it, a chelik of it. The Ramah says, while speaking about taking haircuts today, which is a separate discussion, the Machaber says from Lamed Daled, which technically is tomorrow, but because it falls on Shabbos, says the Machaber would be today. The Ramah says, haircuts you take from this morning, today, mixes hayoim kekulai. But then the Ramah adds on something that the Machaber doesn't say, and the Ramah is quoting a Maril. It says the Ramah, Umar bin boy k'tzas simcha. Today on Lag Baomer, you marbe b'simcha, k'tzas simcha. It's interesting, if you take a look at the Maril says Umar bin boy simcha. It doesn't say k'tzas. And the way how the Darkei Moshe, when quoting the Maril, he says k'tzas, but he also says mishta v'simcha. So the shaila is, what is this Yom Simcha? Why is Lag Baomer, why is it a Yom Simcha? At kedei kach it's a Yom Simcha, and not only a Yom Simcha, the Magen Avram brings from the Shara Kavanas, that's the written, the Torah written by the what's say? The Talmud of the Arizal wrote, Rav Chaim Vital wrote the Torah of the Arizal, and he brings that he was somebody that used to say Nachem. What we say on Tisha B'Av, we used to say Nachem every single day of the year, including Lag Baomer, and he was in Nenash. Because Lag Baomer is a happy day, and these two Magen Avram quotes it in two places, and one of the places the Magen Avram he says V'Nenash, and in Hilchas Tachnun, when the Magen Avram says V'Nenash, he says V'Nenash al zeh v'pnei shu yomtiv, because Lag Baomer is a yomtiv, so he shouldn't have said Nachem. Taka be misabel throughout the year, but not Lag Baomer. Lag Baomer is a yomtiv. So the shaila is, why is it a Yom Simcha? Why is it a Yom Tov? The Meiri, on the Gemara in Yevamis, the Meiri says, Noyagim not to fast today on Lag Baomer. Why? Because today Lag Baomer is the day that the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. Actually, that's the whole, in this Siman, the Machaber already speaks about it. The question is when they stopped. Did they stop Lamed Daled? Did they stop Lamed Gimel? But they stopped dying now, Lag Baomer, and therefore, Noyagim Shaloi L'Sanis. You may ask me, how could you tell me that they stopped dying Lag Baomer? The Gemara in Yevamis, the Gemara says that they died, the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva were nifter, the Pesach va'ad Atzeres. From Pesach till Shavuos. So what does it mean till Lag Baomer? So it's not Pesach to Shavuos, it's Pesach to Lag Baomer. Okay, so the emphasis is that it's in that Kufa. It's not the discussion now, but if you hold the first half, the second half, there's a certain amount of days, how much they were nifter. But says the Maral in the Chedusha Agadis on Yevamis, and he says, very interesting, the Gzeira stopped Lag Baomer, and therefore no one else died anymore after Lag Baomer. However, the Talmidim that got sick before Lag Baomer, they were still nifter after Lag Baomer also, up until Shavuos, up until Atzeres. Al Kaponim, so the Gemara says that they were nifter with Pesach vad Atzeres, and Zokta Meiri noyegim not to fast on Lag Baomer because they stopped dying. Stop means they stopped getting sick and being nifter. Good. So noyegim shaloi l'sanois. But the shaila is, why is it a day of simcha, a day of Yom Tov? I understand it's a day to give shvach v'aidah, maybe to stop the avelis, but it's a day of simcha. What's the simcha? So the emes is that the Goyin stells to the Gemara in Tainus. The Gemara at the end of Tainus, the Gemara says on this that it says that like Yom Tovim b'Yisrael, like Yom Kippur and Tesvav B'Av. So the Gemara says in one pshat, what was the big Yom Tov of Tesvav Av? So the Gemara says, explaining how Rashi explains Al-Pida Braisa, that for 40 years in the Midbar, a Baskel went out and said, those that were in the Gzeira, that they had to die in the Midbar, the Mesia Midbar, they should dig their cave, their caver. They should go dig your caver. They went into the caver. And in the morning, the ones who heard the Kruz saying, go out, means that they didn't die, and they went out. And that repeated for 40 years. The last year, when those that went in, the next morning, they got up, but they thought maybe they were toya with the cheshbon. They were off by a day or so they continued doing this up until Tesvav Av. But by then already they saw that the moon was full, so they knew that they didn't make a toyas in the cheshbon of the day, so they knew it's time they could come out. And Memela, that was a simcha. So says the Goyin, just like over there there's a simcha, so too over here there's a simcha. Just like over there the Mesa and Midbar stopped dying, so too over here also the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. What's the shaila? The shaila is, the Gemara says, I want to quote read the Lashon HaGemara. The Gemara says, the Kulan Mesu. The Kulan. Not the Kulan, they all died. V'hoya ha'olam shamim. In other words, there was nobody left. V'hoya ha'olam shamim. The world was shamim, was empty. There was no Torah. V'kulan mesu. They all died. So by the Meisei Midbar, what the Goyin says, that was the Yom Tov of Tesvav Av. That's because Lamaisa, some stayed alive. Mashenket over here, nobody stayed alive. So what's the simcha? It's a simcha, it's a Yom Tov. So the Pri Chadash asks this question. The Pri Chadash, not the whole Arichas what I said, but he asked this question: what is the Yom Simcha of Lag Baomer? Yom Simcha, it's a Yom Tov. Everybody died. There was nobody left. Says the Pri Chadash and the Chida. The Simcha was like what the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, "Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva etzel Rabbi Isav," and he came and he was machadash, and he had 5 new talmidim. Reb Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, Reb Shimon, that's Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Reb Elazar ben Shemua. So the simcha of Lag Baomer, what's the simcha today? The simcha is that there's a continuation in Torah. Because Be'etzim, the 24,000 Talmidim were nifter v'haya ilim shamim. There wouldn't have been a continuation of Torah, but now that Rabbi Akiva went and got 5 new Talmidim to be mamshech the Torah, that's the simcha. On the note of this simcha of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva getting 5 new Talmidim, or actually others say the Lashon that he was masmach, he gave smicha to the 5 Talmidim. The Chayyim says along these lines, the Chayyim says that it's the Hilula of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Hilula is like a Lashon chasana. It's Hilula, and he says Ulachvoidoi of Reb Shimon Noya Gib K'tzah Simcha. The Chidah says Yom Lag Baomer Yarba Simcha Lachvoid Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. It's Yom Hilula delay, and I wanted just these words: the Noida Sheritzoy Noyu, the Ratzon of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Sheyismachu b'Yom Zeh. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai wants that we should be b'simcha today. Lashon Moira Betz with the Chidah. Hilula does not dafka mean a yard site. Hilula means unhappiness. Today is the happy day of Reb Shimon. The Zohar in Parshas Hazinu, a very long Zohar, and the Zohar goes through what happened the day when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter. It's very interesting. Just a little bit I looked, and it starts off that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai set up, he had somebody to record everything that happened that day. It's very interesting. Reb Abba, a Tana Reb Abba to write, and then it says at one point he wasn't able to hear anymore. He was recording, and he wanted to see what happened, but he wasn't able to look because there was a big fire. The Oira Torah, that's when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was being nifter. But Al Kapanim, the Zohar says that when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter, there was a baskel that said, Olu v'asu, come together, viskanshu, and get together, lihilula de Reb Shimon. Lihilula. So it's not lihilula. And why? Like it's explained, because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter b'shleimus. He was nifter, he was mashlam everything that he had to do. So Mamela, there was a gavaldige simcha hilula der Reb Shimon. So that's a reason why to be besimcha, marbeg tzas besimcha. There was a hemshech haTorah, ubemeyuchad Reb Shimon, like Reb Shimon himself wanted that we should be besimcha today, and the simcha is because there was a hemshech haTorah. Some actually say that some takas say that it's the yard site today, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. The Chaim Sofer in Drashos, in pre-Eitz Chaim from Reb Chaim Vital, that's an earlier ksavim written before Shara Kavanis. The Aruch HaShulchan says Oimrim shenestalik, that it's the yard site. The Balatanya in the Siddur says that it's his yard site, the Kaf HaChaim. And Mamela, it's the simcha of a yard site, though it's not so clear. It's questionable. The Chidah brings, in Marasayin, it brings a Yesh Mefachbekin. He says that the Reb Chaim Vital later was actually in the Shara Kavaris over there. He doesn't bring it because it's Hilula, but it's not the yard site. But Al Kaponim, that's the Hilula. That's what's a Yom Simcha. Just on the note, if it is the yard site, and that's why it's a Yom Simcha today, Lag Baomer, because of the yard site of Reb Shimon. So the shaila is, on the yard site of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not a Yom Simcha. It's a Yom Tainus, Zayin Adar. So why is it that Zayin Adar is a Yom Tainus, and Me'idach, Lag Baomer, not only it's not a Yom Tainus like we saw, the Meiri says Noyagim Shaloi L'Sanois, it's actually a Yom Simcha, it's a Yom Tov. So there's a few terutzim. One teretz said in the name of the Divrei Chaim, and he says like this, that it depends if a tzaddik is nifter b'shleimus, meaning to say is he finished everything he wanted to do, then the yahrzeit is a yom simcha. Masha inkein, if a tzaddik kafi ritzoynoi still had more to accomplish, then it's not a yom simcha, it's a yom tainus. Moshe Rabbeinu very much wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael. Why did he want to go into Eretz Yisrael? It's like the Gemara. The reason why he wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael, he wanted to see Eretz Yisrael, he wanted to eat the Paris. So the Gemara says, because he wanted to Mekayim mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz. So Mela Moshe Rabbeinu kefir etzoynoi, he wasn't allowed to be mashlim all his avodas. He wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael to do the mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael. Mi'idoch, like we mentioned before from the Zohar, that the Baskel came out that when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter, he was mashlim all his avodas. So Mamela, that's why unlike Baomer, if you say it's the yahrzeit, that's why it's a Yom Simcha, Masha'inkein on the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a Yom Tainus. As we see that Moshe Rabbeinu still wanted to accomplish more. There's another teretz said, this the Minchas Halaza brings, that there's a chilek between the day that Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter and the chilek between the day of Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter. When Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter, the Gemara says that nishtakach 3,000 halachas, the Gemara says. So it's a Yom Tainus. Ma'ashek, the day that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter, there was a gavaldige gilui oyer of Torah. Zohar, a chelik of the Zohar, but there was giluyim on the day of when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter. So that's the chiluk between why on the day of when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter, it's a Yom Simcha, Ma'ashenk in the day when Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter. Another teretz in Eretz Tzvi, the Kasha Klaver, actually speaks about it a few places with a few terutzim, but he says that the reason why a yahrzeit is a Yom Simcha is because the tzaddik, his nes'ala goes up more. He says that Moshe Rabbeinu, even b'chayav, Moshe Rabbeinu hit the top. He was able to see the Shechina Basbaklaria Meira. It was the highest shayach, and the Mela, however you understand that there's no going higher, so Mela, that's why on the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu it's a Yom Tainus, as opposed to on Reb Shimon Bar Yochai it's a Yom Simcha. Other things that happened on Lag Baomer, so to speak, to say why it's a Yom Simcha. The Aruch HaShulchan says that Lag Baomer today is when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai went out of the Ma'ara. So it's a Yom Simcha. He had to be in hiding for all the years, so he came out. That's a Yom Simcha. The Chassam Sofer and a tshuva, interesting tshuva, but just to take out mamash, this is like about 2 lines in the tshuva, and the Chassam Sofer says another reason why the Simcha, the Lag Ba'omer up here Medrash. He says that the Medrash says that the Mon started to fall in Lag Ba'omer. Lamaisa, he himself asks, it's a Mafurish Gemara, and it's also a Rashi ala Torah and Beshalach. Just the Rashi says clearly, Tesvav Be'ir is the next day after Pesach Sheni. But Al Kapanim, he brings a Medrash. So we have over here different reasons of being Besimcha. how you taka b'simcha? What are you supposed to do to be b'simcha like Baomer? So the Chidah says, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai himself tells us already what to do. Brings the Gemara in Gittin, Shanu Midoisai. Learn my Midas, my Torah. Reb Vosner, there's a nice page that different things Reb Vosner says, V'gabi Lag Baomer, he says that when he was a Bacher in Yeshiva in Chachma Leblin, after Meir Shapir was nifter, the Kozhik lover took over to be the Rosh Hashiva. And he said, Lag Baomer, he used to ask from all the Bachrim to say over members, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And then afterwards, he spoke and he said a pilpul going throughout Kol HaTorah Kula. Actually, if you want to have be able to look to see, maybe to have an easier time to find all the members, there's a sefer called Midas Rashbi that brings together all the members. There's a list of all over where it is. Where are they? It's in Shas, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Mishnayos, Sifra, Sifri, Tosefta, Mechilta de Rashbi, Medrash Rabbah, Medrash Tanchuma, and on, where these members of Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon says you want to connect. What do you want to do? Like he said, to be b'simcha today, by learning his members. Just mamash to say over in Tasant, one thing he brings the Gemara, it's a Gemara in Pesachim, that is Gid Hanosha, Mutter Ba'ano, Aser Ba'ano. So Reb Shimon says, Aser Ba'ano, Shimon Bar Yochai. So he brings over here, that's also L'Shitasi, he brings a Zoyer, that the Zoyer says that Gid Hanosha is Aser Ba'ano, and he says it's L'Shitasi in the Bavli. Also on the note of connecting to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, in Me'or Einayim he brings, in Yisbach Lev he brings Amsachtas Tainus, that when a person learns the Torah of somebody, which it says Svasa is Doivivais Bekever, the Pshat is because it's a rochnistic thing. When a person said Chidushim, the ear came, its Apo in a Shmosei comes out. So when a person learns somebody else's Torah, that's how you connect. He says that's even called, he says from the Baal Shem Tov, that's even called going al kivroi. So if you can't make it to Miron, that's connecting like going al kivroi. But upon him being able to be mesameach, be able to utilize today, the day of Lag Baomer, we should be zoicher to be able to tap in, to connect to the Oyer of Reb Shimon, the Oyer Torah of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, by learning his Torah. Have a wonderful Shabbos.